Hello, this is the Shoddy Strawman. Today I'm going to be going over a new ban that just happened in Little Cup. Rufflet has been banned. And I'm going to go over why it was banned, as well as the impacts it's going to have on the metagame as a result of its ban. Alright, so what was the reasoning of why Rufflet got banned? So, reasoning given by Fiend Little Cup leader is Rufflet is incredibly strong due to its stock, flying, fighting coverage backed by Hustle. So, Hustle boosts your attack by 1.5 times, and it reduces your accuracy of your physical attacks by 0.8. So, for Brave Bird, for example, it'll give you a 50% increase to your attack. So that would mean that you get an extra 9 if you're at 18. So that would get you up to 27, which is really, really high. And then on Brave Bird, it would make it so that way your accuracy is 80%. Now, if you had a move like a less accurate move, such as Zen Headbutt, that would turn it into 72% accuracy, and then corresponding to everything else as well. So you think, oh, well, that's a bit of a downside, isn't it? Wouldn't that at least limit it somewhat, because you have a 20% chance to just miss? Well, you can also run Aerial Ace, and the move does not check accuracy, it's Flying Stab, and it's also boosted by Hustle. So functionally, you just get a free choice band if you're running Hustle, and you attack with Aerial Ace. But then you also have Brave Bird to hit even harder, and then 80% of the time, you're going to hit anyway. And you're going to do double the damage that Aerial Ace would because your base power increased, so there's that. Close Combat is the fighting coverage that he's talking about, and that was really good for breaking over stuff like Poniard, because quadruple fighting weakness, and then you also have... like, even neutral targets would not really want to take this. Even if Glimmet Rock Poison type, it can resist the Aerial Ace and the Brave Bird, it's still going to take a lot of damage from Close Combat because it doesn't resist it. Because if you wanted to be able to resist the flying type stab of Aerial Ace and Brave Bird, you had to run Steel, Rock, or Electric. So, like Magnemite. And then the issue there is that Close Combat could hit all of these mons for at least neutral coverage, and then in some cases super effective, such as in Magnemite and Poniard. And that meant that it was really a hard time to wall. What else they got? So we have Aerial Ace helps Rufflet remain a strong and reliable enough Choice Scarf user, and has been the most common and nearly uncontested best user since day one. So, because you have Choice Scarf, that boosts your speed by 50%. So if you have max speed, that'll bump you up to 24. And you did have other Choice Scarfers that you could use. You could use Choice... actually, you could probably try to Choice Scarf all three of these. But like Choice Scarf Poniard, and that would be able to speed tie it. But then the issue there is that you're compromising your defensive capabilities a bit, because instead of using an Eviolite in order to boost your defense and special defense by 1.5 times and make yourself much more bulky, you had to spend it instead on making yourself faster. And, I mean, it depends on your team composition whether you want to have a Scarf Poniard or a non-Scarf Poniard, like Eviolite variant, but it would sort of force you to have the Choice Scarf, and even then you only tie Rufflet, so you could just lose a speed tie and then your Poniard dies. You could do Choice Scarf Glimmet, but its stats aren't really geared to being a defensive mon, so it would really easily just die because of how low its bulk is. Like, if you look at Poniard, it's got 45 HP and 70 defense, and that's pretty alright. But with Glimmet, you have very, very little on the defensive side, and 10 less points in special defense is not going to be a good time. And I mean, you can still kind of run a Choice Scarf on this, but because of its ability in Toxic Debris, when this Pokemon is hit by a physical attack, Toxic Spikes are set around the attacker. You would much rather use this defensively, so that way you can set up Toxic Spikes for free over the course of a game, or use it solely as a hazard setter, so that way you can start off the game pretty strong. And you don't really want to use that as a Scarfer in order to try and deal with Rufflet, and even then you still have a tie with it. So that's not great, because you only get up to 16 speed. Magnemite you could also do, but you don't even tie it, is the main issue. You can only get up to 15. And Rufflet did that a lot, is that it just, although you think like, oh, that'd be fine, because you can just outscarf it with another Scarfer, it was already really fast as is. And that made it really hard to revenge kill. And then, oh, well, what if they're not running the Choice Scarf variant? I mean, even if they are running Choice Scarf, that should be pretty reliable, yeah? Well, also, more and more people have began using Bulk Up plus Agility Rufflet. And what that would do is that you have Bulk Up, Agility, so you would use Agility, become faster than the entire tier because it boosts your speed by 2 stages, meaning that you double it, so it goes from 16 to 32, whereas with Choice Scarf, it would go from 16 to 24. And then you also have bulk up to make yourself more physically bulky, as well as boosting your attack. So even you get to boost your hustle, boost your regular attack, make yourself even more strong. You have roost for longevity, so even if you do take a few chip attacks, you have to really, really attack into this hard in order to be able to break over it. And then you could run something like Aerial Ace and not even have to worry about a hustle check. So that made it really, really strong. And then also you compare it with teammates like a Diglett. If you wanted to trap like all of these, you could also use Terra Ground on it, and then have Terra Blast. So that way you can just blow through these anyway, and it doesn't even matter. And it's also conditional on your opponent. Like, if your opponent runs a flying type, then you can't do something like this. But if there's no ground, I'm sorry, not ground, not ground, no flying type, then what are they going to do? And then what else do they have? Oh, the former tricks in Choice Band, Brave Bird, Oko, and Neutrals, and Terra type ground, picking apart dedicated counterplay. Rufflet has steadily grown more and more limiting as it became more flexible itself. Yeah, so even if you were like, oh yeah, no, it's fine. I have Choice Scarf. I have Ghastly, and that's running a Choice Scarf. It's also got like Sludge Bomb, Thunderbolt, all this other stuff in order to be able to Oko this Rufflet, so that way it limits it. Alright, well then you just ran into the Agility bulk up set, and now it can absolutely destroy the Ghastly. If it ever locks into Shadow Ball, which you want to run because it's Stab. And that just made it very, very obnoxious to deal with. And even if Ghastly wasn't out, like if you were out against something that you could really easily feast on, like a Toadstool, because it's Grass Ground type, and you just absolutely eat it for breakfast with an Aerial Ace, then as it switches out, you can Agility, and nothing can relatively Revenge Kill it without using Priority. So that was great. And as a result, it became banned. So now the question is, when we have the viability rankings, what gets improved and what gets worse as a result? So if we look down here, Giraffric definitely gets better, because there's no longer this ginormous physical threat that can hit off of Hustle Aerial Ace right into it. In 4th slot, you could also run U-Turn, so that means that even if you're like, oh, well, it's fine, I can just switch into my Glimmet in order to take the Aerial Ace. But it's like, oh, no, it's fine, I just U-Turn out instead, and then you get all the progress back. You can go into your own Diglett in order to trap Glimmet, Pawniard, Magnemite, any of that stuff. And it became very, very, very bad to deal with. Very unhealthy. Diglett gets a bit worse. I mean, technically, because like it could run Sucker Punch, and that was pretty valuable in threatening out Rufflet. But you lost a fast pivot that you can go into that would force in a lot of your opponent's checks that did not want to be versus Diglett, so that was alright. Mudbray stays the same, I think. No, it probably gets a bit better, because even with its defense raises, Rufflet's Hustle, Aerial Ace, or Braver would just break through it. Oh, you can also Terra type flying this, and then you just become absolutely obnoxious because you can Terra type flying Aerial Ace. So then you have 2 times bonus from your Terra, because you normally have Stab, but then it gets boosted to 2.0 with Terra, and then you have Hustle. And so you got like something around a +3 times modifier instead of a 2.25, and that was very, very unhealthy. Pawniard kind of gets better. Like, it's hard for it to get much better anyway, because I mean it's already so high up, paired well against Giraffrig, and its Sucker Punch is already really valuable for breaking stuff like Diglett. Toadstool for sure gets better because I forget like the usual set. I think it's because that's it always does that. Then yeah, you run like a spread like this for it, and you wouldn't have max speed. But the main thing that it really had an issue with is that even if you had a Rapid Spin up and Rapid Spin boost your speed by 1 stage, Rufflet could still come in and threaten a kill with Aerial Ace. And Toadstool, I mean, it could do stuff like knock it off in return, but that was the best you could do, and then you would always lose your Toadstool as a result. So, but now it gets much better, especially because now Giraffrig probably wants to run a special set more often, because I mean, it has the space to do so now. And one of the reasons why you wouldn't is because, like, well, you just die to Scarf Rufflet anyway, so what's the point? Ghastly, I feel like it gets a bit worse, because one of the things that it really liked is like, oh yeah, well, I'm just faster than the best Scarfer anyway. And it has a bit of a hard time with Magnemite Kind of has a bit of a hard time with Mudbray because of how bulky it is naturally. Overall, I think it's coming out of the exchange kind of fine. Doesn't really mind it. Does Glimmick care too much? Not really. Because I mean, it means that you can still use all your usual sets for it. If I go to my VR boxes that I have, you would have Choice Scarf, Focus Sash, and Eviolite. They all do roughly the same thing anyway. But it just means that Eviolite doesn't have to. Eviolite's no longer like a mandatory thing. You can run Focus Sash or Scarf. It opens out a little bit more. Quaxley and Surskit. Quaxley doesn't care too much because I mean it's a physical wall anyway. No, it cares a decent bit about it because that means it doesn't get absolutely demolished by it. But Surskit cares a lot because it was really easy to just like, oh well, it's fine if Surskit comes in turn 1 because I have my Rufflet in the back and it doesn't really care about the webs anyway, and I can just start breaking things with that. So now because there's no just webs immunity that's really strong on baseline, Surskit gets much better and webs are pretty good as a result. You do have to worry about Toadstool also getting better, because that means there's nothing to threaten it immediately. I mean, Surskit can do that itself because it gets access to Icy Wind, but Toad can still rapid spin it away, and there's a lot less vulnerability. Also, you can sometimes run Toadstool spreads that don't have like this amount of speed. Like you could sometimes run like, oh well, I want to have like 15 speed so I can outspeed some stuff, like a neutral Pawniard, and then you would run like more defense or attack or whatever, and that means that even after a rapid spin, you don't outspeed Rufflet, and that's kind of bad. But versus like, so it has a little bit more flexibility because now it doesn't absolutely need to run that amount of speed. So that's kind of alright. Magnemite and Zorua, I feel like Magnemite kind of drops a little bit because the one thing that you really want to use it for is Rufflet because it can takes the attacks really well. Well, not close combat, but it takes everything else kind of well. And you're pretty decent as a Scarfer, but it's kind of eh. Mainly just because you kind of liked seeing a Rufflet if it locked into the wrong move. If it locked into a flying type move as opposed to fighting, then you would just get a free Volt Switch or whatever. And that was pretty nice. Does Zorua care too much? Not really. A lot of people aren't using it, and the reason for that is because it's just kind of awkward to pilot. You could also run, if you wanted to, in my VR box, I have a Scarf set, and that's because you had knockoff U-turn trick Terrablast with Terrablast fighting. It didn't care too much about Rufflet, but you could still be faster than Rufflet and knock it off. I think its place is still fine, because its main utility was not, I get to outspeed and kill Rufflet, it was, I get to knock it off and use Sucker Punch or whatever. Ray never really cared about it, because stuff like Weasel and Psyduck always outsped because they have Swift Swim and Rain anyway. Crabrawler changes its set a bit, because before you would run Terra-type Electric, and then you can, with like you have a good amount of physical investment, and then you can live in Aerial Ace, and that was fine. I'm like, it did its job, what it needed to do. But like the main issue now is just like, well, what Terra type do you really want to run? I mean, you can probably run something like Terra type Ground, and then you could probably replace Thunder Punch with Earthquake if you wanted to, because then you can hit stuff like Tinkatink, Marianne, as well as Pawniard with a single move, as opposed to having to rely on Thunder Punch. And then also Tinkatink can use Pickpocket and steal your Eviolite. Dealing likes it gone because it's a grass type and doesn't want to see flying types, so that's good. Marianne, I think is kind of neutral here, because it could take like a hit or two because of how naturally bulky it is. I think it kind of appreciates not just having to switch in because it's the only thing that takes Rufflet, and then immediately dying to Diglett though. So, positive change. Nimble's weird, and you'll see it a lot in the... You'll see its evolution low kicks in the higher tiers because it's got Tinted Lens First Impression plus Sucker Punch. And you can do that in this tier as well, because you have Life Orb, Tinted Lens, First Impression, Sucker Punch. You don't have Stab and Sucker Punch, but you do have Tinted Lens, which means that if you're not very effective on your move, then you deal double damage anyway. And that can mean for a really, really potent Revenge Killer. But not having to deal with a really annoying flying type. I mean, like, you could still do a lot of progress against it, but it's still, you didn't want to see it all that much, because it could just be the bulk upset, and then you've just given it a free setup turn. So that's pretty bad. But it enjoys not having to see it. Stunky, I feel like it's kind of eh. It doesn't really care too much, because its main, I don't think it was really used as a physical wall. It's mainly for checking stuff like Girafarig. It's a poison type that doesn't automatically die to Diglett because of how strong Sucker Punch is, which is funny. I think it kind of appreciates it, mainly because then it just doesn't have to deal with this really fast attacker, and then you can sack it and get aftermath damage. That was kind of it. So now you can use it a lot more freely, I think. Tank, so in my VR box, I've updated it recently. Before, I ran Oranberry as the typical set with a faster spread. But what you would do is that you can take one Aerial Ace, you use up your Oranberry, and then you pickpocket the Choice Scarf, and that was pretty valuable in limiting the Rufflet's capabilities, because that means it can't go as fast anymore, and it's more easily dealt with stuff like Girafarig, which outspeeds it. Ghastly would outspeed it naturally then, so you could just hit it with a Thunderbolt. Crabrawler would outspeed it, and if you Terra Electric, then you could hit it really hard. Deerling could then do some stuff like Headbutt or Body Slam in order to paralyze it even further. I mean, it also made it like kind of, no, not squishier. I should not say that. But like Stunky, Deerling, Crabrawler. Glimmet could speed tie if it was max speed. Like, a lot of these mons really appreciated it having the Scarf gone. And although it could switch moves, it was significantly slower as a result. So it meant it was more manageable. But now you just want to run strictly Eviolite, because there's no reason to steal the Choice Scarf anymore. And also the added benefit of the Eviolite defense means that you can take a hit from Girafarig, Earthquake. Otherwise you couldn't. Then down to beats here. Choodle doesn't really mind. It was a Shell Smasher. It didn't care about it anyway. Drifloon, I think, cares a lot about this, because now it becomes essentially the best flying type. Well, quote-unquote best, but like it's going to be like your new thing to try and threaten Toadskull out more, and it's kind of it was the only other flying type up that high. I mean, Quaxley technically, because you can Terra flying that a lot, and it has Brave Bird. But it's your new thing that can actually threaten out Toadskull a lot more because of acrobatics. Fuecoco, I don't think it cared all that much, because it would just die to Terra Ground anyway. I mean, like, you could Will-O-Wisp it if you lived one, or you could roar it out. But its main spread, if I go to my VR box, was very specially defensive as opposed to physically. So that way you could deal with Nasty Plot Girafarig a lot better. And it's not awful, but I don't think it cares too much. Gothita might, and that's because we no longer have a really good flying in the tier, which means that people will be more inclined to run a fighting type, such as Mankey or Crabrawler, and it likes preying on stuff like that. So maybe, we'll yet to see. Houndour, it wasn't taking it on anyway. It's whatever. Impidimp, I don't think it cares. No, it cares because you could run it on Screens, the bulk up agility set, and Impidimp like that as a teammate, so now Screens is worse, so that means you'll likely see less Impidimp. Larvesta likes not seeing it because, I mean, speed tie, but also flying type that would eat a bug type. Mankey's typically Scarf anyway. If you want to run a bulky fighting type, you run Crabrawler. And like what you would like about Scarf Mankey is that it gets U-turn, and then you could also run Stone Edge. So you kind of free up a slot, but you're still worried about defensive pivot Larvesta. So there's that. Meowth actually liked seeing it, because if it's the Scarf set, then I'm pretty sure... Go to my calc real quick. Let me do Meowth. All-out attacker versus Rufflet. Choice Scarf. Fake out into Fent. If you do... Oh, it barely misses out. Even then, getting that much chip damage on a Rufflet of roughly 13. At worst, you get 21. That's still a lot. Like, that's still pretty good. And then if you get Rocks Up or something that can never switch in again, and I doubt that you want to even take that because of how valuable that is. I don't think Meowth minds not seeing it anymore. I mean, Meowth is kind of like is B tier because it's kind of frail anyway. But it was a really interesting revenge killer because you can do fake out and fent and kill a lot of things unexpectedly. So like even if Rufflet took like a little bit of chip, then it would die because it needed to have like 2 points and that was it. So I think it could use it really. It could be a really effective anti-Rufflet mon, but it also required some sacking. I think it gets out of the exchange kind of okay though. Because then, like, oh, well, it doesn't really... I don't mind it as much, because then I can use it still as a counter to screens, as well as rain stuff, like Buizel and Psyduck. It was mainly like an additional benefit, like, oh yeah, you can kind of deal with Scarf Rufflet kind of well, so... Shelter, it's a Shell Smasher, it doesn't really care. Its main thing was not, oh yes, I can deal with Rufflet, it was, I want to Shell Smash, and that's it. Shellos, it's a counter thing for rain, and that's kind of it. So, I mean, doesn't care too much. Strudel is really neutral. It didn't deal with it anyway, so. Strudel and Voltorb are kind of in the same boat, because their main sets are, like, they want to set up rain, or be like an attacker, and even if you're unburdened Strudel, you have to take a hit first. And like, even if you do take the hit, you want to set up, and most of the time you're not going to be facing a Rufflet. So, B tier, B minus tier. Fungus, I think Fungus actually might become much better. We still have to have Girafarig gone. The reason for that is one of Girafarig's abilities that it likes running is Sap Sipper. So if you get hit by a grass type move, you're immune and you boost your attack. So that means that like, it's so close to being really good because Rufflet would really, really prey on this because it could just attack into it and kill it really easily. But it can almost do some stuff with Spore. And if Girafarig gets banned, it's likely going to get suspect tested. But once, like, if it ever gets banned, Fungus becomes so much better because now it doesn't have to deal with Girafarig, which would threaten it with Psychic Stab, and then Rufflet that would deal with it with Flying Stab. So it's all A-okay. Also, that means that the best flying type is now Drifloon, so you're likely not going to be seeing too much of it. And that means that you can use this a lot more reliably, I think, especially because like, Rain doesn't like seeing it. Well, not too much. You have to waste a turn on Prediction. So, and then also sleeping something on Rain is actually really valuable. So, Fungus definitely gets out of this exchange with quite a good amount of profit from it. Mischief, neutral, I'm pretty sure. Although I think I probably enjoys the change because it has a decent speed stat and you can use it as a Scarfer. So, I mean, there's less competition for the Scarf slot now, so it enjoys it. Nummel doesn't care. You do Simple plus Trailblaze or Flame Charged. It didn't really care about it all that much, so it's whatever. Slowpoke, I literally have no idea what this thing still does, so I mean, it kind of doesn't. Mine kind of does. Just because, like, oh, well, it can come in on an area list and take it because of how large its defense stat and HP stat is, and then you can regenerate off, but then you get hit by U-turn, so... I feel like it might drop to C tier, and I'd be kind of fine with that. Snover, I am #1 Snover defender, because I believe in the undying spirit of Christmas. But I think it's actually kind of... It's a mixed decision, because what made Snover enjoy... like even being on teams is that it has Ice Shard, and that would do 50% to Rufflet. Yeah, Ice Shard would do roughly 50%, and that was a pretty good benefit of it. Well, you're a physical wall and you can take hits, and then you can also chip Rufflet. And even if it made it that even if Rufflet wants to come in, it's like, oh well, it's a grass type. It hates seeing grass type. It hates seeing a flying type. You can still chunk it really hard with an Ice Shard and limit its potential throughout the rest of the game. And now that we don't have to deal with Rufflet, I think it'll definitely rise, because that means that you have Diglett, Mudbray, Toadskull. You also have a good matchup versus Quaxley. Not really against Surskit, and you still have a good matchup versus Rain. But the main issue there is like, well, what if the main reason why Snover was so good was that it was a physical wall that can take a lot of hits, but also can clap back because Ice Shard was so valuable versus Rufflet? You never know. Future's very undecided on Snover. We'll have to see how it goes from here, but me being a Santa believer means that I think that Snover's still going to be pretty good, especially since it's such a good check to rain. But it's all of the Mons from B- up. I don't think there's any real special mentions in C and below. Like, at most, maybe Bramblin, just because then it's like, oh, well, now your spinner doesn't immediately die to this really fast threat that can come in on its Ghost type moves, so... nah, that's basically it. That's all I got. But in total, I think the metagame is going to become more healthy based on the fact that we no longer have to deal with this obnoxious Scarfer that can just win games because, oh, you thought it was Scarf, and turns out it just agility'd, and now you have lost because it can get like 20 bulk ups. So it's whatever. Well, that's all I got to say on the matter, but thank you very much for tuning in. I really appreciate it, and if you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. I'll see you in another video, and have a good day.